repairing a hole in the welding process.
So what did you have, a pinhole in the corner there?
A couple of pinholes, and then I added this weld to keep it from snapping off. And I'm getting ready to polish it up a little more. I was going to add 2 more pieces in here as a transition from here to here, but
Little curved band kind of thing? Or?
yeah, but I decided against it, although I have the pieces.
All right, let's take a close look at that. Now, the machine surface on the big piece there, is that your final?
It's going to be like that, except smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use a smaller because it's a little too big, and I want to get these small areas with the same texture.
Mm-hmm. And then the center little dots are going to be mirror.
They're the eyes. And I don't know what to call this piece yet, but you can never see it all. Let's put it that way. That kind of a title. Not seeing is believing, because that's not true.
Well, that's great.
So I repaired that. I'm going to polish that with this. And you could... Okay, here we go. You want to step back just for a minute?
Another sculpture in the works. Zeeke working on the latest. Materials at hand, the grinders.
That's not drop on me. You know, the spring released and the whole thing flew up.
Oh, the spring that I just shot. Yeah, that's kind of exciting. I just want to get a shot of all of those beautiful shapes that you have there. It's amazing looking. Okay, about to do some welding.
Open the gas, put on the power. Grounding it. Filling in a few little minor holes. Okay, ready?
Yeah. Yeah, add more stuff and then you take it off.
Well, artwork is more about 85% grinding and 10% welding and 5% your waste. I don't know where it went.
Art math. Okay.
Okay.
Missy's sculptures.
Pretty bad. Let's hear the sound quality on this.
Coming up, Ma. Well, if I grew up with the sound of grinding in the basement, there was always the sound of the keyboard or the typewriter upstairs. And here we go. Up to Mom's little airy. Here's the writing room and herself.
Here is herself,
Here she is.
struggling.
Okay. And Mom's new computer. Yay.
And here's my mother looking over my shoulder.
Grandma Sophie. Hi. Bet you didn't think you'd be in this show.
Yeah.
My beautiful grandma from
Want me to
Brooklyn.
shine a light on her?
No, it's lovely just the way it is. My beautiful grandma from Brooklyn.
And there's your grandpa over on the other side.
And that was that Mohegan Colony?
That was the Mohegan Colony on the porch
Yeah.
of the house. He loved that place. He was reading the New York Times, which he did every day of his life. And this photograph was taken the day that Zeeke and I got married.
Well, let's do a little zoom in on that. There they are. Those two cute kids.
And that's me at age 16. And that's a sculpture I did of Mavis McIntosh, who was my literary agent and the person who taught me more about writing and publishing than anybody. She was, in a way, my mentor for 12 years. When I first met her, I was smitten by her eyes.
She had wonderful eyes.
She did. She had incredible eyes. You can't see them on this, but they were an intense blue.
Blue, yes.
And they were like
Giblets.
magnified beams.
Yeah.
And I asked her if I could do a portrait head of her. And I had this, what kind of clay do you call it? Plasticine. A lot of plasticine, which of course never hardens. So she was a rather vain woman. And I absolutely adored her. So she came over and she sat on the porch. And I managed to stretch this portrait to almost a year, during which time she talked and she told me an incredible number of things
Stories.
about the publishing industry, about writers she had known. She'd been John Steinbeck's agent. She'd been the agent for like half of the most important writers in the United States. She had a very unsentimental view of writing and of writers. I don't think she thought very much of me as a writer, but I was good for rides over to the farm stand. And when she wasn't paying attention, she told me an awful lot. She was a very sly woman, and I had reverent regard for her.
Well, that's evident because of the portrait. You can see that.
I really thought she was terrific.
And there it is on top of the, was that the 11th edition?
That is the second 11th edition that I have owned.
Of the
first-
Encyclopedia Britannica.
It's the 1911 edition. I had had one, and I sold it with our house at Dobbs Ferry, and there was not a day that passed that I didn't regret having parted with it.
It's true, because I remember you saying it over and over again.
Well, it was the most wonderful edition. And then about 3 years ago, I found this beat-up edition, 11th edition, and I bought it at the Branford Library, Blackstone Library book sale for $10. That it's still great, and particularly since I'm writing a book that's set in the year 1895, 1911 was just around the corner. So, for example, when I wanted to know how somebody would handle the reins to steer a horse, I found that out in the 11th edition of the Britannica in an article about horse-drawn carriages and things like that. Obscure. That delight me.
Yeah, we like obscure.
Yeah, I like obscure. Someday, when I'll build a house as high as a steeple, I'm going to do something to astonish the people. I climb fortune's ladder, so lofty and fair, till I take my seat in the president's chair. Let me tell you that I've been working on this book now for 7 years, and it would seem that I have exhausted every possible idea. I'm now writing a summary of the book to submit to a professional editor with whom I have not yet spoken, and I thought it was going to be a short summary, but it's turned into 26 pages.
A woman of few words.
Yeah, always. But what is astounding to me, of course, writing a summary exposes all of the holes in the story, and also opens up opportunities which you never would have suspected were just lying around loose that you didn't recognize. And as recently as 5 o'clock this morning, I leaped out of bed and wrote myself all those notes.
Which notes are those?
Those are notes about, here, I'll read you one. I don't know what it says. That Marcus's letter, that is the father of the family, who had come to America 7 years before the rest of his family joined him. Marcus's letters for the first 3 years described only privation, filth, and disappointment in his experience, because he was a lower middle class person, and having to live in a slum on Rivington Street, it was unthinkable to him to bring his family to America when they would have to suffer in a way that they hadn't had to suffer in in their own town, where they were considered the creme de la creme. But what I'm doing here is refining and fine-tuning the beginning of this summary. And it's kind of astounding that after all of these years, I don't have the sense of proportion exactly right, and that each time I look at it, I see something that could be improved, sharpened, illuminated.
7 years. So, is that something of a record for you, or was Guinevere
No,
was
it
longer?
was not the longest I've ever spent on a book. I spent 10 years trying to write a novel about Guinevere, partly because I was convinced that the most powerful American myth, that is, to the extent that American culture was at the beginning English rather than Hispanic, let's say, or other, the myth of King Arthur really invested American life, the idea of conquering success, masculine dominance, and so forth. And I decided to write about Guinevere, who was, at least sexually, a rebel in her relationship with Lancelot, as a way of counterbalancing the myth, which identified her as a weak or evil woman. And I was going to, struggling to write the Arthur story from Guinevere's point of view. And I guess I read more than 100 books about the Arthurian myth.
So you do a lot of research before you actually write anything,
Oh, yes.
even if it's something as close to fiction,
Yes.
complete fiction. As,
Well, I made 3
yeah.
trips to Europe to visit all of the sites associated with Arthur.
Yeah, and also you made a trip to Lithuania for the book you're writing now.
Yes. A trip is always a good way to start things off. Of course, that's how I wrote Within This Wilderness, was going out to see Joe.
Do you think that's a kind of a leitmotif of your projects, that you start them out by going on a journey to figure out if it's the right idea or not? Or?
Well, I don't think that. I think when I went to visit Joe, I wasn't thinking about writing a book about
You're
it.
wondering if he had enough to eat.
That's all.
Yeah.
Really.
You wanted to make sure he was safe.
He was living on mushrooms and fish. And of course, I went with 4 paper bags full of groceries.
Yeah, well, a lot of people live on mushrooms and fish now. That's a, recherche kind of haute cuisine.
Yeah, I think it wasn't his choice necessarily. But the relationship of a trip to a work of fiction is that it provides mental pictures and makes more believable, it makes more concrete ideas which which float around sort of disembodied in your head, and it makes the abstract concrete. I do want to show you the drawer in which is Guinevere's sarcophagus. This is this drawer. The work that I did, and it goes all the way to the back of the desk, and there's more in here. Someday I'm going to look at all of that. But I abandoned that book because I started out thinking I was going to reform the myth. And it took me many years to recognize that that was my real motive. And then I realized that the myth was far truer and more powerful than anything I could write about it. And I didn't want to write an anti-feminist book, because I figured that I'd go out and shoot myself if I got a review from the Women's Review of Books that said that I was an anti-feminist, because I'm not. But I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And that's why I left it.
It's an interesting thing to me to recognize that when you want to clear something up, you go out, on a trip. And when Dad wants to clear something up, he goes to the basement.
That's absolutely true.
He goes in.
He goes in and I go out.
Yeah.
Now, I thought also, perhaps for the sake of history, you ought to see these volumes, these 2 volumes, which are writings of the complete 350 pages of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Totally unsatisfactory. And this
Version number 8,643.
No, but these are each complete versions. This box contains my first writing of the book.
Wow.
So each of these compendia are an effort to grasp the significance of the whole.
Well, you've always done a lot of versions of things, not just stuff you've written, but things you knit.
That's so true. How many times do I rip out a sweater in the process of doing it?
Well, it's like writing, I
It
guess.
is. It is
Especially
very-
when you do it without a pattern. And everything you write is without a pattern, in a sense, because you're inventing it.
That's true.
Yeah. So we're going to end the tour now of the respective work areas. And then we will meet again in the kitchen for coffee.
Of course, I was going to say, when do we eat?
Yeah, okay. All right.